The Saturday had started with the smell of burnt pancakes and the sound of Leo's gleeful shrieks. Anna, nursing a lukewarm coffee, watched from the kitchen window as her 10-year-old brother, clad in a makeshift cape fashioned from a bedsheet, waged a valiant war against a legion of imaginary goblins in their front yard. His weapon was a plastic sword, a relic from a long-forgotten Halloween costume, its silver paint chipped and worn. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated childhood joy, a pocket of peace in a world that often felt anything but. The peace shattered at precisely 10:17 a.m. It started with a voice, sharp and grating, slicing through the morning air. "You boy, what do you think you're doing?" Anna's head snapped up. Across the street, standing on her immaculate porch like a queen surveying a tainted kingdom, was Carol. Carol, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, her pastel-colored tracksuits, and an expression permanently fixed in a state of mild disapproval. She was the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood decency, the president of the Homeowners Association, and a woman who seemed to derive her life force from complaining about trivialities. Leo, mid-swing, froze. He looked at Carol, then at his sword, then back at Carol, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm fighting goblins," he said, his voice small. "You're menacing the neighborhood," Carol retorted, her voice rising in pitch. "Waving that weapon around, it's a public nuisance, and you're on my property line." Anna pushed open the kitchen door, stepping onto the porch. "He's 10, Carol, it's a toy sword." Carol's gaze shifted to Anna, her eyes narrowing. "Oh, here we go, the enabler. I should have known. You people have no respect for the rules. That boy is a menace, and I won't have it." "You people," Anna repeated, her voice dangerously low. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means people who don't care about property values or public safety," Carol sniffed, crossing her arms. "I've seen the way he runs around, wild and unsupervised. It's only a matter of time before he hurts someone." "He's playing, Carol," Anna said, her patience wearing thin. "It's what kids do, or have you forgotten?" "I haven't forgotten the rules," Carol shot back. "And I'm warning you, Anna, control your brother or I'll find someone who will." With that, she spun on her heel and disappeared into her house, the screen door slamming shut behind her with a satisfying thud. Anna sighed, running a hand through her messy bun. She called out to Leo, who was now standing uncertainly by the mailbox, his sword hanging limply at his side. "Come on, buddy," she said, forcing a smile. "Let's go inside. I think there's a goblin in the kitchen trying to steal the last of the cookies." Leo's face brightened, the confrontation with Carol momentarily forgotten. He charged into the house, his cape billowing behind him, and Anna followed, the unease settling in her stomach like a cold stone. She knew Carol wasn't one to make idle threats. An hour later, two police cars pulled up to their curb, their lights flashing, painting the street in strobing blues and reds. Anna's heart leaped into her throat. She saw Carol standing on her porch again, a smug, triumphant look on her face. Two officers, a man and a woman, both looking grim and businesslike, walked up their driveway. Anna met them at the door, her mind racing. "Ma'am," the male officer said, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. "We've received a report of an armed individual at this residence making threats." Anna stared at him, dumbfounded. "Armed? You've got to be kidding me. My brother was playing with a toy sword." "We have to take all reports seriously, ma'am," the female officer said, her eyes scanning the interior of the house. "Can we see the weapon?" Anna, feeling a surreal sense of detachment, went to the living room and retrieved the plastic sword. She handed it to the male officer, who examined it with a straight face, turning it over in his hands as if it were a loaded weapon. "And where is the boy?" he asked. "He's in his room," Anna said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "He's 10 years old." The officers exchanged a look. "We need to speak with him." They followed Anna up the stairs to Leo's room. He was sitting on his bed, building a Lego castle, humming to himself. When he saw the police officers, his eyes widened and he shrank back against the headboard. The male officer knelt, trying to soften his expression. "Hey, buddy, I'm Officer Miller. We just need to ask you a few questions, okay?" Leo nodded, his lower lip trembling. "That lady across the street," Officer Miller began, "she said you were threatening her with your sword. Is that true?" Leo shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "No, I was fighting goblins, I told her." "And did you go on her lawn?" the female officer asked. I don't know," Leo whispered. "Maybe my foot did. I was chasing a big one." The officers continued their questioning, their tone becoming more accusatory, their questions more pointed. Anna stood in the doorway, a helpless, silent spectator, watching as they chipped away at her brother's innocence, turning a game of make-believe into a criminal investigation. The sight of Leo, so small and vulnerable, trying to explain the rules of his imaginary world to two stone-faced adults, broke something inside her. After what felt like an eternity, the officers stood up. Officer Miller turned to Anna, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, given the nature of the complaint and the ambiguity of the situation, we're going to have to take your brother down to the station." The world tilted on its axis. "You're what?" Anna gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "It's just for a few hours," the female officer said, her tone devoid of any sympathy. "We need to file a report, have a child services agent speak with him. It's standard procedure." Standard procedure? Anna's voice rose, cracking with disbelief. "For what? Playing in his own front yard? This is insane." "Ma'am, if you interfere, we'll have to arrest you for obstruction," Officer Miller said, his voice firm. Tears streamed down Anna's face as she watched them lead her brother, her sweet, imaginative 10-year-old brother, out of the house. Leo looked back at her, his face a mask of terror and confusion, his small hand lost in the grip of the female officer. He didn't cry, but a single, silent tear traced a path through the dirt on his cheek. As the police cars pulled away, their sirens silent now, the flashing lights a mocking farewell, Anna's gaze fell on Carol, still standing on her porch, a self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. In that moment, something inside Anna shifted. The fear, the helplessness, it all coalesced into a single burning point of pure, unadulterated rage. She turned and walked back into the house, her movements stiff and robotic. She went to the kitchen, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over a name she hadn't called in months. A name that held more power than Carol, with her petty rules and her homeowners association, could ever comprehend. Her finger pressed the screen. The phone rang once, twice, and then a familiar voice, calm and measured, answered. "Anna, is everything all right?" "Uncle Jack," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears, "I need your help." She told him everything, her words tumbling out in a torrent of anger and despair. She told him about Carol, about the toy sword, about the police officers, about the look on Leo's face as they took him away. When she was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Where are they taking him?" he finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The downtown precinct," Anna choked out. "I'm on my way," he said. "Don't worry, Anna, I'll handle this." The line went dead. Anna sank onto a kitchen chair, her body trembling. She knew that when her uncle said he would handle something, he meant it. Jack Reed wasn't just her uncle. He was Governor Jack Reed, the most powerful man in the state. And Carol, in her petty, vindictive crusade, had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The waiting was the hardest part. Every tick of the clock was a fresh wave of anxiety. Anna paced the living room, her mind a maelstrom of worst-case scenarios. She imagined Leo alone and scared in a cold, sterile room being questioned by strangers. She imagined the fear in his eyes, the confusion, the dawning realization that the world wasn't always a safe and magical place. She tried calling her parents, who were on a second honeymoon in Hawaii, a much-needed break after years of putting their family first. But the call went straight to voicemail, their cheerful, pre-recorded message a stark contrast to the nightmare unfolding in their home. An hour crawled by, then another. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. Anna watched as Carol's husband, a meek, balding man named Tom, pulled into their driveway. A few minutes later, the lights in their house flickered on, a picture of domestic tranquility that made Anna's blood boil. Finally, just as the last sliver of daylight faded from the sky, a car turned onto their street. It wasn't a police car. It was a sleek, black sedan, the kind that whispered of power and influence. It pulled up to the curb, and Anna's heart leaped into her throat. The back door opened, and Leo scrambled out. He looked small and pale, his eyes red-rimmed, but he was safe. He ran across the lawn and into Anna's arms, burying his face in her shirt, his small body racked with sobs. Anna held him tight, whispering words of comfort, her own tears mingling with his. Over his shoulder, she saw her uncle emerge from the car. He looked tired, his face etched with lines of stress. But his eyes, when they met hers, were hard as steel. "Is he okay?" Anna asked, her voice hoarse. "He's fine," Jack said, his voice a low rumble. "Shaken up, but fine. They didn't even process him. I got there before they could." He walked them into the house, his hand resting on Leo's back, a silent, protective gesture. He settled Leo on the couch with a glass of water and a promise of a late-night pizza feast, then turned to Anna. "Tell me everything again," he said, his voice grim. "From the beginning, don't leave anything out." Anna recounted the day's events, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, the initial shock and fear giving way to a cold, hard anger. She told him about Carol's smug smile, about the officer's dismissive attitude, about the terror in Leo's eyes. Jack listened, his expression unreadable, his hands steepled in front of him. When she was finished, he was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the house across the street. "The woman's name is Carol," he said, more a statement than a question. "Carol Peterson," Anna confirmed. "She's the HOA president." Jack nodded slowly. "I see." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "David," he said, his voice low and authoritative. I need you to do something for me. I want a full-scale audit of the Briarwood Homeowners Association, finances, bylaws, complaints, everything. I want to know every rule they've ever enforced, every fine they've ever levied, and I want a background check on the president, a Carol Peterson. I want to know everything about her. Tax records, employment history, any and all legal entanglements. I want it on my desk by morning. He paused, listening to the person on the other end of the line. I don't care what it takes, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Make it happen. He hung up and turned back to Anna, his eyes blazing with a cold fire she had never seen before. She wanted to play with the rules, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Fine, let's play. He walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to look at the Petersons' house. The lights were on, the family presumably inside, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their heads. Some people, Jack said, his voice laced with a quiet fury, need to be reminded that there are consequences for their actions. They need to be reminded that the world is a much bigger, more complicated place than their little kingdom of manicured lawns and petty regulations. He let the curtain fall, plunging the room back into shadow. He turned to Anna, a grim smile touching his lips. Tomorrow, he said, is going to be a very interesting day for Mrs. Peterson. Sunday dawned heavy and silent. The usual weekend chorus of lawnmowers and distant laughter was absent, replaced by a tense quiet that seemed to hang over the neighborhood. Leo, who normally would have been up with the sun, slept late, the exhaustion and trauma of the previous day etched on his young face. Anna found him curled on the couch, the plastic sword clutched to his chest like a shield. The sight sent a fresh pang of anger through her. She was pouring coffee when her uncle's black sedan pulled silently into the driveway. Jack didn't knock. He let himself in, carrying a thick manila folder under his arm. He looked as if he hadn't slept, but his eyes were sharp, alert, and held a glint of something that looked like grim satisfaction. Morning, he said, his voice a low rumble. He set the folder on the kitchen table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. The preliminary report on Mrs. Peterson and the Briarwood HOA. Anna sat down, her heart starting to pound. Jack opened the folder and she saw pages and pages of dense text, spreadsheets, and what looked like legal documents. Our friend Carol is more than just a neighborhood busybody, Jack began, his voice cold and precise. She's a predator who's turned this HOA into her own personal fiefdom. For the past 5 years since she was elected president, she's been systematically abusing her power. He slid a spreadsheet across the table. These are the finances. Notice the landscaping and community improvement budgets. They've tripled in 5 years. Now look at these invoices. He pointed to a series of receipts from a company called Peterson Premium Plantings. That's a company registered to her husband, Tom. They've been awarding themselves exclusive, no-bid contracts for years, charging the HOA 3 times the market rate for everything from planting petunias to trimming trees. Anna stared at the numbers, a sick feeling rising in her stomach. She's embezzling. In the most flagrantly obvious way, Jack confirmed, but it gets worse. He flipped to another section. Bylaws, she's amended them a dozen times, always without the required community vote. She's instituted rules that are not only absurd, they're illegal. Did you know there's a clause against unnatural hair colors or that? Any political sign other than for her preferred candidate is subject to a $500 fine. She's been targeting specific families, mostly renters and new move-ins, hitting them with fines for things like having a basketball hoop in their driveway or leaving their trash cans out for more than 2 hours past pickup. He tapped a list of names. The Miller family, 2 houses down, fined into foreclosure because their son's medical equipment was visible from the street. The Garcias, who moved in last year, they've received over $10,000 in fines for unapproved garden decorations. It's a pattern of harassment and discrimination, plain and simple. The file also contained a history of Carol's personal life, a string of frivolous lawsuits against former employers, neighbors, even a grocery store over a slippery floor, a history of calling the police for the most minor infractions. She was a woman who used rules and regulations as a weapon, a shield for her own bitterness, and a tool to exert control over others. So what happens now? Anna asked, her voice barely a whisper. Now, Jack said, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face, we start pulling the threads. The first thread was pulled at precisely 11:00 a.m. A state-marked courier on a motorcycle pulled up in front of the Petersons' house. He walked briskly up the driveway and taped a thick envelope to their front door. It was an official notice from the state attorney general's office announcing a full-scale, top-to-bottom audit of the Briarwood Homeowners Association effective immediately. Anna watched from her window as Carol opened the door. She saw the initial look of annoyance, the way she ripped the envelope from the door. She saw the flicker of confusion as Carol read the letterhead, and then the slow, dawning horror that spread across her face, draining the color from her cheeks. The letter bore the official seal of the state, and at the bottom, a signature that was both elegant and unmistakable, Governor Jack Reed. Carol stumbled back into her house, slamming the door. The curtain of invincibility had been torn away. The second thread was pulled an hour later. The neighborhood email list, usually reserved for announcements about bake sales and lost pets, lit up. An email sent from an anonymous address contained a link to a public records website. The website detailed the state's investigation into the HOA, including the initial findings of financial mismanagement and discriminatory practices. It didn't name names, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew who was in charge. Almost immediately, the neighborhood began to stir. Phones started ringing. People emerged from their houses, gathering in small, hushed groups on their lawns, pointing towards the Petersons' house. The Garcias were talking to the Millers. Old Mr. Henderson, who'd been fined for the color of his mailbox, was deep in conversation with the young couple who had been cited for their baby's stroller being left on the porch. The fear that Carol had so carefully cultivated for years was beginning to evaporate, replaced by a shared sense of outrage. Carol, it seemed, could feel the tide turning against her. Just after 1:00 p.m., her front door flew open and she stormed across the street, her face a mask of fury. She marched right up to Anna's porch, where Anna was now sitting, calmly sipping a glass of iced tea. Leo was inside, watching a movie, the volume turned up loud. "You," Carol shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is you, you did this." "Did what, Carol?" Anna asked, her voice even. She wasn't scared anymore. Knowledge was power, and her uncle had armed her with an arsenal. "Don't play dumb with me," Carol spat, her finger jabbing the air. "The audit, the emails, you're trying to ruin me." "Ruin you?" Anna said, raising an eyebrow. "I thought you were a big believer in rules, Carol. It seems some people in the state government think you haven't been following them. Something about no-bid contracts and illegal bylaws. Does Peterson Premium Plantings ring a bell?" The color drained from Carol's face. She stared at Anna, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The bully on the playground had just had her own tactics used against her, and she didn't know how to react. "You have no right," she stammered. "I am the president of this association. I have authority." "Your authority ends where the law begins," Anna said, her voice dropping, taking on the same cold, precise tone her uncle had used. "And you, Carol, have been breaking the law for a very long time. You terrorized families, you extorted money from your neighbors, you traumatized a 10-year-old boy for playing in his own yard. And for what? To feel powerful, to feel important." Anna stood up, walking to the edge of the porch, looking down at the sputtering, enraged woman. "Your little kingdom is crumbling, Carol, and you built it on a foundation of sand." "This isn't over," Carol hissed, her eyes wild with a mixture of rage and panic. "I will sue you. I will sue your whole family. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Oh, I think we do," a calm, powerful voice said from behind them. Both women turned. Governor Reed's black sedan had pulled up to the curb, silent as a shark. He had emerged without a sound and was now walking up the driveway, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. He wasn't Uncle Jack anymore, he was the governor. He stopped beside Anna on the lawn, his presence radiating an aura of absolute power and authority. The neighbors, who had been watching the confrontation from a distance, fell silent. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. The governor's gaze fell upon Carol, and for the first time, Anna saw genuine fear in the woman's eyes. The bluster, the rage, the self-righteous indignation, it all vanished, replaced by the primal terror of a creature that has just realized it is no longer the apex predator. Governor Reed looked at the terrified woman, his eyes as cold and hard as chips of ice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words, when they came, were quiet, measured, and carried the weight of an executioner's sentence. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, his voice cutting through the silent afternoon air, "you wanted to teach my nephew a lesson about consequences. Allow me to return the favor." The governor's words hung in the air, heavy and final. Carol stared at him, her face a canvas of disbelief and terror. The name, the title, it finally clicked into place. This wasn't just some well-connected uncle. This was the man whose face was on billboards, whose voice was on the radio, the ultimate authority in the state. She had picked a fight with a 10-year-old boy and had somehow summoned a titan. Without another word, Governor Reed turned, gave Anna's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, and got back into his sedan. The car pulled away as silently as it had arrived, leaving a stunned and fractured neighborhood in its wake. Carol stood frozen on the lawn for a long moment, then with a choked sob, she turned and fled back into the fortress of her home. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. Monday morning arrived not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, bureaucratic clicks that signaled the complete dismantling of Carol Peterson's world. At 9:00 a.m., a van from the city's code enforcement department pulled up to her house. Two inspectors in crisp uniforms, armed with clipboards and measuring tapes, began a meticulous examination of the Peterson property. They measured the height of the back deck, which they noted with grim expressions was 3 inches over the legal limit. They examined the electrical wiring for the new patio lights, finding it wasn't up to code. They discovered the shed in the backyard had been built without the proper permit. Each violation was noted, a fine calculated, a stop work order issued. The perfectly manicured prison Carol had built for her neighbors was now being turned against her, its own rules used as the bars of her cage. At 10:30 a.m., the mail carrier delivered a certified letter. It was from the Internal Revenue Service. Both Carol and Tom Peterson were being audited, not just for the previous year but for the past 7 years, the maximum allowed by law. Every transaction of Peterson premium plantings, every inflated invoice, every personal expense disguised as a business cost would be put under a microscope. Tom, who had been a silent, compliant partner in his wife's schemes, began to crack. Anna saw him through the window, pacing in their living room, his face pale, running his hands through his thinning hair. He was a man who had enjoyed the fruits of his wife's tyranny but had never considered the cost. Now the bill was coming due. The fallout continued to spread. At the downtown precinct, Officer Miller and his partner were called into their captain's office. They were informed they were being placed on paid administrative leave pending an internal affairs investigation. The official reason was procedural misconduct and failure to de-escalate a non-threatening situation involving a minor. The unofficial message was clear: you touched the governor's family, your careers are over. The news sent a shockwave through the local police force. No one would be making that mistake again. For Anna, watching the methodical destruction of Carol's life was a strange and unsettling experience. There was a grim satisfaction, a sense of righteous justice being served. Every time she saw a new official vehicle parked in front of the Petersons' house, a part of her cheered. This was for Leo. This was for the terror in his eyes, for the innocence that had been stolen from him, however briefly. But there was another part of her, a smaller, quieter voice that was unnerved by the sheer, overwhelming force her uncle had unleashed. It was like watching someone use a sledgehammer to kite. Ella Fly, the response was so total, so devastating that it bordered on terrifying. She had called her uncle for help, and he had responded with the full, crushing weight of the state. It was a stark reminder of the power her family wielded, a power she had always taken for granted and had never truly understood until now. Leo, meanwhile, was slowly healing. He had stopped sleeping with the plastic sword, but he was quieter, more subdued. He didn't want to play outside anymore. The front yard, once his kingdom of adventure, was now a place of bad memories. He would sit by the window, watching the strange comings and goings across the street, his brow furrowed with a child's confusion. "Why are all those people mad at Mrs. Peterson?" he asked one afternoon, as a crew from the city began the process of dismantling the illegal deck. Anna sat down beside him, searching for the right words. "Because she broke the rules, buddy," she said softly. "A lot of them, and she hurt people by doing it, so now she has to face the consequences." "Like a timeout?" Leo asked. Anna managed a small smile. "Yeah," she said, "a really, really big timeout." The breaking point for the Petersons came on Wednesday evening. The strain had become unbearable. The constant presence of inspectors, the looming threat of financial ruin, and the complete ostracization by their neighbors had taken their toll. The whispers followed them whenever they dared to step outside. The glares were like physical blows. They were prisoners in their own home. Anna heard the shouting start just after dinner. It was Tom's voice, louder and more forceful than she had ever heard it. It was the sound of a dam breaking, of years of pent-up resentment and fear finally being released. "I can't do this anymore, Carol," he yelled, his voice carrying across the silent street. "They know everything, the contracts, the invoices, the accounts, they know it all." "We'll fight it," Carol's voice shot back, shrill and desperate. "We'll get a lawyer, we'll sue them for harassment." "With what money?" Tom's voice was laced with bitter irony. "They've frozen our accounts, Carol, the business account, our personal savings, everything, we're broke." There was a crash, the sound of something being thrown against a wall. "This was you," Tom roared. "Your pettiness, your need to control everything. I told you to leave that kid alone. I told you, but you couldn't help yourself, could you? You just had to be the queen of the neighborhood. Well, look at your kingdom now." The shouting continued, a raw, ugly symphony of a marriage disintegrating under the weight of its own corruption. Anna closed her curtains, not wanting to watch, but unable to block out the sounds of the collapse. She took Leo upstairs, put on a movie for him, and turned the volume up, trying to shield him from the ugliness. An hour later, the front door of the Petersons' house slammed open. Tom emerged, carrying a hastily packed suitcase. His face was blotchy, his eyes red. He didn't look at Anna's house, he didn't look at anything. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove away without a backward glance. The street fell silent once more. The war was over, the enemy had been routed, her army deserted, her fortress breached. Anna walked to her window and pulled back the curtain. Across the street, a single light burned in the Petersons' living room. She could see Carol's silhouette standing motionless in the middle of the room. She was alone, surrounded by the wreckage of the life she had built. The smugness, the anger, the self-righteous fury, it was all gone. All that was left was a hollow, defeated shell. The phone rang, startling her. It was her uncle. "I heard Tom Peterson left," he said, his voice calm and even. "He always knew everything." He contacted the Attorney General's office this afternoon. He's agreed to testify against his wife in exchange for immunity. It's over, Anna. I know, she said, her voice quiet. She looked at Carol's lonely silhouette. There was no victory in this, no triumph, just a profound and unsettling sadness. What happens to her now? She'll be charged, Jack said, his voice devoid of emotion. Embezzlement, fraud, multiple counts of harassment. She'll likely lose the house to pay back the HOA and the fines. She'll probably serve time. He paused. Consequences, Anna, that's all this is. Anna thought of Leo sleeping peacefully upstairs. She thought of the Millers, the Garcias, and all the other families Carol had tormented. Justice had been served. But as she looked at the broken woman across the street, a single chilling thought echoed in her mind. She had unleashed a monster to fight a monster, and she wasn't sure if she could ever put it back in its cage. The silence that followed Carol's downfall was heavier than the noise had been. Within a week, a for sale sign was hammered into her once perfect lawn. It was a bank sale. Carol hers. Elf was gone, vanished into the labyrinth of the legal system she had once wielded with such glee. The house across the street stood empty, a monument to a swift and brutal victory, but it felt less like a trophy and more like a tomb. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief, but it was a shallow, nervous breath. The tyranny was over, but an unspoken fear had taken its place. When Anna went to get the mail, her neighbors would offer friendly waves, but their eyes would dart away too quickly. Mr. Garcia, whose garden was now defiantly filled with colorful, unapproved gnomes, brought over a plate of tamales, but the gratitude in his voice was mingled with something else, deference, fear. They didn't see Anna, the freelance graphic designer who always forgot to take her trash cans in. They saw the governor's niece. They saw the woman who could make a phone call and bring the full, terrifying weight of the state down upon someone's head. She had saved them from a bully, but in doing so, she had revealed herself to be something far more powerful and therefore far more frightening. She was an outsider in her own home. The unease festered inside her, a slow-acting poison. The satisfaction of revenge had been fleeting, replaced by annoying guilt. She had wanted to protect her brother, but the scale of the retaliation felt disproportionate, grotesque. She looked at her uncle's name in her phone and felt a chill. The man who had piggybacked her on his shoulders, who had taught her to ride a bike, now seemed like a stranger, a formidable, dangerous force she had foolishly summoned. The change in Leo was the hardest to bear. He was safe, but he wasn't whole. The laughter didn't come as easily. The spark of uninhibited joy in his eyes had been dimmed. He drew pictures not of knights and dragons, but of sad-faced boys in gray rooms and big, shadowy figures with no faces. He had nightmares that left him crying out in his sleep. Anna had won the war for him, but he was its most significant casualty. The trauma couldn't be erased by audits and arrests. A month after Carol's departure, the other shoe dropped. It came in the form of a sleek, unmarked van that parked down the street from their house. A woman in a sharp business suit got out, a microphone in her hand, a cameraman in tow. They started interviewing the neighbors. Anna's blood ran cold. This was it, the story would get out. Governor uses state power for personal vendetta. The scandal would destroy him, and it would be her fault. She called Jack, her hands trembling. "There are reporters here," she said, her voice a panicked whisper. "They're asking about Carol, about what happened." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Jack spoke, his voice was unnervingly calm. "Don't talk to them, Anna. Stay inside. I'll handle it." "Handle it how?" she demanded. "Jack, they know they're going to crucify you." "I said I'll handle it," he repeated, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. The line went dead. Anna spent the rest of the day in a state of high anxiety, peering through the blinds, watching the news crew methodically work their way through the neighborhood. That evening, she sat in front of the television, her stomach in knots, waiting for the 6 o'clock news, for the exposé that would bring her family crashing down. The segment finally aired. The reporter, a woman named Sarah Jennings, stood on their street, the now vacant Peterson house looming behind her. "A story of community, courage, and a governor who listens," Jennings began, her voice filled with admiration. The headline on the screen read, "The Briarwood Revolution, How One Neighborhood Fought Back." Anna stared, dumbfounded, as the story unfolded. It was a masterpiece of political spin. The piece painted a picture of a neighborhood terrorized for years by a corrupt, power-mad HOA president. They interviewed the Millers, who spoke tearfully about the fines that nearly cost them their home. They spoke to the Garcias, who described the pattern of racial harassment. Carol was portrayed as a suburban monster, a symbol of petty tyranny. And then the hero of the story emerged, Governor Jack Reed. According to the report, the residents of Briarwood had banded together, gathered evidence, and sent a petition to the governor's office pleading for help. Governor Reed, a champion of the people, had heard their cries and launched an immediate investigation, personally overseeing the effort to bring the corrupt official to justice. There was no mention of a 10-year-old boy with a toy sword, no mention of a frantic phone call from his niece. The entire story had been sanitized, repackaged, and sold as a populist triumph. The segment ended with a clip of her uncle at a press conference earlier that day. He stood at a podium, his expression a perfect blend of solemnity and resolve. The abuse of power at any level is a cancer, he said, his voice resonating. G with authority. Whether it's in the halls of government or in a homeowners association, it is our duty to root it out. I was proud to stand with the brave residents of Briarwood, and I promise you this: as long as I am your governor, the voice of the people will always be heard. The reporters applauded. Anna felt sick. She turned off the television, the silence of the living room pressing in on her. It was all a lie, a calculated, brilliant, and utterly cynical lie. He hadn't just helped her, he had used her. He had used Leo's trauma, the neighbors' suffering, all of it as a stepping stone. He had turned a messy, personal vendetta into a political commercial. The phone rang, it was him. Did you see it? He asked, a note of satisfaction in his voice. I saw it, Anna said, her voice flat and cold. Problem solved, he said, as if closing a file. Problem solved, she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You lied, Jack, you twisted the whole thing into some kind of campaign ad. I protected our family, Anna, he said, his voice hardening, and I addressed a clear case of corruption. It's called good governance. Sometimes the two align. Don't, she snapped, her anger finally boiling over. Don't you dare hide behind good governance. This was never about the Millers or the Garcias. This was about you. You saw an opportunity and you took it. You used your own nephew's trauma as a political prop. That's a very naive way of looking at it, he said, his voice turning icy. The world is not a clean, simple place, Anna. It's about power, who has it and how they use it. Carol Peterson had power and she used it to hurt people. I have more power and I used it to stop her. And yes, if in the process the public is reminded that their governor is on their side, then I call that a victory for everyone. Everyone except Leo, she cried, tears of rage and frustration streaming down her face. He's still having nightmares, Jack. Your victory didn't fix him. All this overwhelming display of force, it didn't make him feel safe. It just showed him that the world is a place where monsters fight monsters and sometimes the bigger one wins. Is that the lesson you wanted to teach him? There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. He'll be fine, Jack said finally, his voice dismissive as if talking about a minor inconvenience. Kids are resilient. And in that moment, Anna understood. The man she had called for help, the uncle she had loved and trusted, was gone. In his place was Governor Reed, a man who saw people not as family but as assets or liabilities. Leo's pain was a liability to be managed. The Briarwood situation had been an asset to be exploited. I have to go, Anna, he said, his voice already distant. I have a fundraiser to attend. The line went dead, leaving Anna in the silent, suffocating darkness. She finally understood the chilling thought she'd had the night Tom Peterson left. She hadn't just unleashed a monster to fight another monster. She had discovered that the biggest monster of all had been in her family the entire time, and he was just getting started.